Morning.
Yeah.
Morning.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you all for going to continue our study of stewardship. The last thing Doreen said when I left the house was, "Don't forget your glasses." So, but I think if I get far enough away from my paper, I can still. So I'm not sure if I can read any Bible passages. So
Well, we can help you.
you can handle that. But no, today we're going to talk a little bit about time and talents. Have you ever heard of the 3 T's of stewardship, or the 5 T's of stewardship? Those kind of things. Can you kind of name what those are from your experience in the past? Have you? Time, talent, and treasure would be 3. Sometimes they. You can sit there. I got it. Sometimes I've seen 5 or 7 or 9. You know, the one I looked up for 5 added testimony and temple. I think testimony, of course, telling others. Temple being taking care of yourself, in a sense, your earthly temple, you know, and your physical well-being as part of your Christian life. So there are many different categories. The author of this study, Pastor Curtis, kind of talks about that a little bit in a Lutheran context. He says here. So let me kind of go over this part that he talks about. Time, talent, treasure, and then he says no thanks. So, but the first time he presented all the material in the book that he wrote, someone asked him about time, talent, and treasure, which has been a stewardship cliche for a long time in American Christianity, and he feels it's a good introduction to what he means by keeping our Lutheranism up front. He says there's nothing wrong with talking about time, talent, and treasures. It can be a handy way to draw all of life into the stewardship equation, but he doesn't prefer to use those terms. He thinks it was invented by a pastor who's afraid to talk about money. So, but he wanted to couch our giving of money to God's church in a wider context of generosity. And these days, there are 3, or there are people who, 5 or 7. But he likes the concept of talking about whole life stewardship. And I think we talked a little bit about that last Sunday in terms of wrapping your life around stewardship principles as the Old Testament Church of Israel did, and now the New Testament body of Christ in our church. We do that in a different way. But he likes the terminology. Both concepts are trying to get at an idea that we Lutherans had long before the first stewardship committee was ever created. That's vocation. What does our life work? God has work for each of us to do according to our vocations, and we are to use the resources, the gifts we have from God according to our vocation. That's the Lutheran way of thinking and processing the Word of God. Don't need the gimmicks or the alliteration. We just need good Lutheran theology, he says, brought to bear on the topic of funding word and sacrament ministry. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I particularly like the term whole life stewardship, And so when you just look at time, talents, and treasure, that traditional view, you think those stand alone? How do you think about time, talents, and treasure? We've talked the first 2 Sundays about treasure, so maybe a little bit more about what would you say use of time and talents, or even telling, is? Examples from your own life.
It's kind of difficult to separate time and talent.
Yeah.
Using talent, it's spending time too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Spending time.
Yeah. When I put together the syllabus, if you will, even though it was, just what we're going to do for 4 Sundays, and it wasn't
Yeah.
an in-depth syllabus, I thought, oh yeah, it'll be real easy to talk about time and talent. And when I was preparing, I really had a hard time figuring out how to talk about time and talents.
Well, part of it presupposes, with the time, talent, and treasure model, it presupposes that part of your time isn't allocated towards God unless you look at your time in that manner. And I think where the Lutheran is like vocation holistically, that you're already purposed for God's time on this earth to give Him glory in the most mundane activities and the simplest. And I think even at Lutheran churches in the past, I think when they launch these kinds of weekends or special events, I think the idea is that you got to carve part of that time to be super intentional about God, and I think it's a misnomer. I mean, it's misleading, right?
Yeah.
Because it is more comprehensive, and it's not always as flashy as one might think.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think that's exactly the spirit of what Pastor Curtis was trying to get across. That it is if you emphasize what you do every day in your vocation in life and your whole life stewardship makes a big difference. I mean, and we're going to read some passages that touch a little bit on time and talents, but do those stand alone? Do you consider them interchangeable? Can you substitute time and talents for treasure or vice versa? What do you think? I mean, I've heard people say, I just want to pay staff to do everything. And sometimes in a larger church that actually happens a lot, have a larger staff. People give money and they expect the staff to do
Everything.
pretty much all the work, or at least organize everything.
I like the idea of what you're saying, that it's holistic, that it's something that you're involved in on just a regular basis, that it's something that sort of imbues everything that you do. I like the idea of not really separating out, am I giving financially doing this, or am I giving specifically of my time? How about you're just sort of all together, you're doing what's called for at that moment. If it happens to be writing a check, then great. If it happens to be talking to somebody, then great. If it happens to be giving of your time to be on the phone or just to give somebody a hug or whatever it is that needs to be done, it seems to me that God calls us as part of His body to be intentional about those things in various ways and at various times, and I like that holistic approach.
Yeah, I mean, last week when we were talking about tithing, one of the verses was, first day of the week, set aside your tithe, for that, for what you're going to earn that week, basically. And that's kind of, that's the moment where you intentionally do something about giving. Another moment might be the telling or the others.
Right.
Have you, in your experience at churches, staff involvement versus member involvement, do you have some experiences along that line where you thought one model was better than the other, or?
One more thing. My mom passed away in 2012, and in all those years since then, I was the trustee of their estate. So over the years, my mom we were raised in the Presbyterian church, so it wasn't Lutheran, but she worked for years and years and years at the Presbyterian church. And it's been my blessing over the years. She kept every single piece of paper practically. And I've had to, over the years, they all morphed to my garage from California. So I've gone through boxes and boxes of her church papers. What's really stood out to me is that I don't think I realized as I was growing up and as I became an adult that her life was just tied up and wound up in what she did at and for the church. And I think she did sort of approach it holistically. She didn't expect the staff to do everything. She would go and volunteer there and she was on all kinds of commissions and things. And what I've got from looking at some of her things written out and whatever is really, it's pretty moving and pretty amazing, because I just saw a whole another way of her Christian life that has been blessing me and showing me something after she's headed off to heaven, and that's very cool. I hope that
Yeah, that
people
is.
that are involved in the church is that's just kind of part of who they are.
And I think we have a lot of different vocations all wound up into ourselves, right?
Okay.
We're not just one thing or another, one role or another, and it tends to move and ebb and flow and change and over time. And I think we all have different talents, but I don't think they're all used simultaneously either. So like you were talking about the time, talents, and treasure, it changes over time, and whether you're at a different church or whether you're within your family, or those things too. And so I think we keep using the word holistic, but it is, because it changes and ebbs and flows, and it encompasses your whole life, whether you're recognizing it at that time or you're looking back on how you or somebody else used those talents to be a blessing to others, and maybe they didn't even realize it either. I don't think we have that whole view of it, but it's nice when we get a little hint at what God was using us for as tools for everyone else.
Similar story to what Chris said. My father and mother, when I was younger, it was a little difficult because on Saturday morning I had to go up with my dad and mow the lawn up at church. So I, really couldn't play on Saturday mornings. I really wanted to play. Or I had to the Halloween. I couldn't go collecting candy in the neighborhood until we had gone up to church and watched the Martin Luther movie. For nailing the 95 Theses. And then we'd get home and I could, as quickly as I could, hit all the houses that still had lights on, which, were a lot fewer. My parents both taught Sunday school, or, and how they spent their time. It was, and I convict myself sometimes thinking about, what they did. I can't tell you how many times we had a member of the church over to our house for lunch after Sunday, because they were by themselves, or or they were suffering from something. It's just, and it took me a while. I kind of almost rebelled against that for a while growing up, because it seemed like a little bit of a straitjacket. But as I grew older, of course, I appreciated that look at how they use their time and talents and their vocations to minister for testimony and all those things. So and I'm sure all of us have similar stories of people who've influenced our lives the same way. But it does have a big impact on those surrounding you. Do we fall into a trap sometimes, though, of saying, well, that these are interchangeable in a way? That elements of that whole life stewardship are interchangeable. I can do more of this and less of this. On either side, like the example I used, I want to pay more money to support things, but I don't want to be involved. Or I want to be involved, but I don't feel like I can give, my tithe right now. How do you feel about that? Because I know we all go through that, thinking about that. Any ways that?
Well, you definitely want to support the church, but there are times when you're a young family and you have children, and there are just times that you cannot give of your time. It isn't that you don't want to. It's just that it isn't feasible. And so you may give more, monetarily, because you really want to support the church and everything that they do.
I think,
Our life changes, and the life stages.
And it almost goes with the reading that we had today, where, the foot's just as important as a hand, and
Yeah.
all of it works together to make the whole. And I think, you might have someone who can support the church more monetarily than by, helping out with things, but that's still a part of the body.
Yeah, I think one of the readings we have today was Paul talking about, people's talents, and giving certainly is one of those. He references as the talent of giving is giving generously, because the expectation in this whole stewardship is that we all give, because that's an important part of recognizing where your money comes from, but I think, to your point, some people just have that talent of giving generously, giving more, and so I think that's true. It can be, it can be too formulative sometimes in our minds, but now this may be the accountant in me coming out again, but I like the formulative because it keeps me on track. It keeps me intentionally thinking about, just like intentionally thinking about saying hi to someone, or giving a hug, as Chris says, to someone, or helping in various ways around the church. Intentionally thinking about giving it is good, because it makes you think about it. So I think if we try as best we can to balance all those elements of our stewardship life and give them all full attention, I think we'll find, all the passages we read the first 2 Sundays are the blessings that we will receive, the treasures that we will receive back from God will be shown to us. So there's some Old Testament, I think Malachi, basically Malachi is telling the children of Israel, you're not doing your tithes, test God, test him out and do it. Try, test God out. You'll find out that you will be rewarded. And I again, as we've talked, I don't like the TV minister saying, well, if you give $100,000 to me, you're going to make $1 million, or something. That's not the reward I'm talking about. It's more, the reward in your whole life approach and your life in the hereafter.
And I definitely agree what we're saying here about how it is very much the body of Christ, and having that reverence for him. Like, for example, to your point about tithing, or that's a personal examination and reverence for God, and may not be something your neighbor knows about, but still, as we come together as the body of Christ, serving our various capacities, or even the personalities we've been given. I got a funny example for you. So John's not here right now. He's in Minnesota at his aunt's memorial. However, when I was there for Christmas, there's a lady named Olivia, and she's 101, and she has an organ, okay? And she's moving into an assisted living. And they were all sad because nobody wanted this organ. It was given from John's great-grandfather to somebody with a very German name. And it was in 1914 that this happened. And everybody was kind of disappointed. And having, my mom's estate still open and so complex, I said, you know what, I'd like the organ. And they were like, what? And I'm like, I like it. They're like, do you play? I'm like, no, I don't. But I would like it. And suffice to say, John and all of his relatives came together, moved the organ out of her apartment yesterday, and she sobbed. She was like, I'm so glad it's staying with family, because they were trying to just dump it somewhere, And she was this sweet little lady. And I'm like, I had no idea, the 101, that it would mean that much. But even the family got excited. But see, they all came together, and the people who could lift it, and the people, you know what I mean? There's so many different components of that. And it's a simple example, but it's still, what I mean? I hope I would like to learn to play it, or maybe the girls, and then maybe we could play hymns, and it all goes back to God. You know what I mean?
There's a little bit of it. That's a great story, and there's a little bit of an element of time in there too, because looking back, his great grandfather made it.
I didn't mean he purchased it.
He purchased it for her. He purchased it for her.
Right.
Looking forward,
And she played
someone
it
in
at
your
church.
and
Yeah.
and looking forward, someone in your family
Yeah.
may play that organ
Yeah, yeah.
too.
Neat.
You know, so sometimes
Right.
there's an element throughout time that
That it's a
benefits from
continuum.
your activity.
Right. Yeah, it just kind of
activities.
keeps paying it
Yeah,
forward.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Well, that's
and
cool.
it works because my little nephew played the soundtrack to Friends on it. And they videotaped it. So the organ still works. And I don't know why that was the,
It's
the
not a
song
pump
of
organ
choice.
then. It's not a pump organ then. Or is it?
I
don't
really
know.
don't know enough about the
We'll
instrument.
find out.
We'll
We're gonna
find out.
learn.
We're
Yeah.
gonna learn.
Does it have two real large flat pedals on the middle
I
and bottom?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't remember.
1914. That's
Cool.
about the time you would still have a lot of pump organs.
He met because Melva, John's mom, plays the organ on Sunday, so she taught Levi. So it's highly likely that he knows how to do that.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
with the pump and everything. So
That's cool.
yeah,
we'll find out.
yeah.
Well, I can tell you the burden of having a pump organ. My dad bought one when he was in college. You know, like you think you're
Really?
going to do things,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
and we all do that. We think we're going to buy it, and we end up with this thing. And then, you know, you do a little bit with it here and there. But I love the hope that goes into it. You know, that like
Yeah,
it's
that's
something in the
great.
future.
Yeah.
You know, like your great or the great grandfather who purchased it for her. You know, he obviously had that intention of a legacy being created and
Yeah,
going into
yeah.
the future and fostering whatever talent that maybe she had that
Right.
he recognized. And but it's up to us, people who have it, you know, after that to decide what we're going to do with that. You know, is that
Yeah.
that legacy going to be
Yeah.
a burden or is it going to be a blessing? Are we going to and that's hard. That's so hard with those physical treasures that we end up with. You know, what are we going to do with this?
That's interesting. The legacy that pump organs and organs promote.
hope it
We have one in our living room from the church in North Carolina that we came from.
there
It
you
was in
go.
their basement. They were going to throw it away, and Doreen couldn't stand for them to throw it away.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we had it repaired by an organ guy, and we have it in our house now.
And they're beautiful pieces.
Yeah, and she does.
I see a future here with some organs.
So, but that's a good
Yeah.
Let's open a museum or
example
something.
for a lot of
Yeah.
other things in our life. I think that
Yeah.
that go through that same path that draw us together.
We have a piano at our house that doesn't get played, but when Phil Magnus comes.
Oh, there you go. It gets played very well, then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How did you meet Phil, by the way? Do you mind if I ask?
Actually, I belong to a church in Naperville, Illinois,
Mm-hmm.
and Phil, I think, came the year after.
Uh-huh.
And he was cantor at Bethany in Naperville, and he headed the choir.
Oh, okay.
And somebody said to me, well, we got a new director, Sarah, so you're going to have to try out for the choir. And I go, well, that's not happening. You know, if he's that, you know, musically talented. But that's how I met him. And I have to say it was, it's been quite a treasure over the last 20-some years that I've known him. And he doesn't hesitate to let you know. There was one note I just couldn't get into him. I just couldn't get it. And he just said, Sarah, don't sing that note. And not too long ago, he was at our house and he was playing a hymn. And he said, oh, come here. And I said, what? He said, okay, I'm going to play this and you're going to sing it. And he said, because when you used to sing it at Bethany, you always sang it wrong, and I'm going to show you. And that was just recent, and I'm like, thank you. You know,
You actually started singing in the choir when he came there?
well, I was in the choir already, but we really didn't have anybody directing us,
Oh,
and then he
okay,
came
okay.
as cantor.
So it's
And then
interesting
he took over
how
the
his talents and his
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
developed other people's.
does multiple musical instruments.
Wow, he's very
He plays
talented.
the
Yeah.
accordion and kettle drum and all
Wow,
kinds of.
Wow.
Kettle drum.
Wow.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
multi-talented as well as a great missionary.
Well, as we go through that, there's a couple of passages we'd like to read. How about someone trying 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 10 through 15.
sower and bread for food, will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way, be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. For the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but is also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. By their approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission flowing from your confession of the gospel of Christ and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others, while they long for you and pray for you. Did I go too far?
15, I'm,
To 15.
again, I'm outside of my
While they long
class.
for you and pray for you because of the surpassing grace of God upon you. Thanks be to God for his inexpressible gift.
Yeah, so that brings in those elements, I think, of that type of wholeness in there. Gee, is that a Lutheran study Bible?
It's the church.
The church? Oh, okay. Does someone have a Lutheran study Bible?
Maybe.
The notes down the bottom for chapter 9, verses 10, 11, and 12 of 2 Corinthians. Could you read those?
Harvest. God, who enables farmers to sow and reap, will enable his children to do good works and will prosper their efforts. Your righteousness, not the basis of your good standing before God, but the consequence of exercising the status you now have in his eyes. Verse 11 is, you, enriched in every way, generous, will produce thanksgiving to God. Relief is given and fellowship between Gentile and Jew is strengthened, leading to the further good of abundant thanksgiving to God at the Lord's Supper and elsewhere. That's 11. What else? 12?
12.
12. Ministry, service, liturgy, public work, done for the common good. The term, liturgia, agrees well with the ministry, for it is an old word, ordinarily used in public civil administrations. To the Greeks, it meant public burden, such as tribute, the expense of equipping a fleet of similar things, saints, the impoverished believers in Judea overflowing, thanksgiving to God. Grace circles back to God's throne as our gift to him.
So again, it talks about, elements of how the church is enriched by everyone helping everyone else out through all of those things, time, talents, treasure, and everything. So I thought that was helped kind of weave that perspective again too. Another one, a short one, Matthew 23, verse 23.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the wealthier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others.
Yeah, so Christ is, the scribes and Pharisees kind of went overboard. They did a tenth of the herbs from their garden, but so they were must have been very public about how they did this too, because he's talked about their public issues before. But they neglect some of the other pieces of that whole life stewardship in the way they live their lives. It was in a subsequent verse he calls them. He really goes after him in this section for the next few verses. He calls them, whitewashed sepulchres or, hollow, outward beings. Woe to the scribes and Pharisees. There's a whole long deal there. So it's interesting. That's a little offside. You could probably do a whole Bible study on just who was Jesus Christ the most reproving of in his time here on earth. It was the church of the day, because they weren't they were no longer paying attention to God's word, And so I think it's always good, even though that's not really completely. I guess it is a part of time, talent, and ministry too, because it's how we conduct our ministry and how we, how we as a group of Lutherans in this church, focus the ministry through pastor and our leadership and stuff. So, good things to be aware of. The next one is it's kind of a long one. Maybe we can break it up a little bit. It's Romans chapter 12, entire chapter. It's not a super long chapter, but I think it's a good one. It's entitled in the Lutheran Study Bible, "A Living Sacrifice." So.
I'll do the first part. Let's see, living sacrifices. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you. Just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, who are many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is prophesying, let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it is serving, let him serve. If it is teaching, let him teach. If it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. And I'll stop there and somebody else can do the next section there, starting with verse 9.
Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peacefully with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
Yeah, I like that chapter. It's just kind of one little, relatively short chapter. It encompasses a lot, and kind of what we were talking about in that whole life stewardship approach, where everything you do is wrapped around. In the Lutheran Study Bible, there's a section about living sacrifices in view of God's mercy about that chapter. And it goes to kind of the same thing, being moved to service. How have you been moved to service in the past? I mean, what can you think of examples that have struck you as something? What do you enjoy doing in the church? Maybe that's a better question to ask.
Singing.
Singing?
Yeah.
Planning Valentine dinner.
Yeah,
That is a great thing.
yeah. I know Anita has a talent for making beautiful things for Valentine's
Yes.
dinner.
Oh, she makes some gorgeous things. Yeah.
I cheat.
You cheat.
You cheat very well, though.
I'm doing better.
Well, it's very well done.
Lord, it's hard to be humble.
When you're, what, when you're,
Perfect in every way.
Yeah.
Any other examples
Yeah.
of what you like to do, what you enjoy doing in church?
And I don't think there's a person in this room who hasn't served the church in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many ways, right?
Teaching Sunday school,
Yeah.
being on the council,
Yeah.
you know.
Doing events.
Trying to make things nice for people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
just in, clean the kitchen or,
And you
whatever.
feel good about it, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, it's part of your reward. It's just that feeling of fulfillment in doing it too, I think,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gifts that you give and seeing them come to life in something in the church and used for a purpose, whether it's the scholarship fund that was set up, and you see it being used for people who are getting a Christian education, all those things as we,
The shoe boxes.
things that people receive, that we witness it to them. So I guess, a little bit of, maybe I don't want to be a downer at the end of that, but examining ourselves as everyone has mentioned here, as purposefully making decisions, could someone mistake you for a Christian? Is a way of saying it. In the way we live our lives, is it going to be evident to others? Because that's a way of bringing others to Christ also, is, wow, what's going on with Johnny or Sue, and sometimes that brings an inquiry, and, sometimes it brings someone to the Lord, to church too. So that's a powerful, it's a way of testimony, a way of telling also.
I have a kind of an interesting observation in that regard. My aunt and uncle, who are in their 50s, are going through a divorce. And they, my uncle said privately to me, and he's only a little bit older than me. He was the surprise baby. That's why we're so close in age. Just qualify that. So anyways, he said to me one day when I was visiting, he goes, "You know what makes you and John different?" Alluding to Tim and Kelly. I'm like, "No." He said, "You guys go to church together." He said, "Keep doing that." And he's like, "That, what you're doing, makes a difference for your marriage." And he said, "Kelly and I didn't. We stopped." And so that pulling away from faith, and I don't know that they ever really did go to church. I mean, maybe off and on, but the fact that was an observation for him is something I take for granted, certainly. And I don't even talk a lot about church attendance, but we go when we're in town, and we even found a Lutheran church that's near Donaldson in Nashville, and we go, and they know. And it means something to them, even though for us it's just, a faithfulness on Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah, the Church of North Carolina, Doreen was the secretary there where we went, and the newsletter had been established long before we showed up there, and she started doing it as secretary, and she used kind of the same mold that they had been doing, and the very last section was a listing of birthdays and anniversaries. But they did something different there on the list of anniversaries. And it was a large church, probably 700 members or something like that. And so they put the number of years by the anniversary thing.
Yeah.
Have you seen that before in various newsletters? And it always struck me, every month I got the newsletter, there were 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s anniversaries in there, and I said, well, something's going right with this process here, because you're looking over here and what is it, 50% of all marriages last less than 10 years? Is that the,
Something.
I don't know if that's still true or not, but that's what you hear a lot. But man, when I was looking at that list, it sure seemed like those were going on for life, you know. Just so all those things have an influence on other people. They see a long married life, and it means something to people. I think, yeah, it's a good example. But here they talked about, I think, the vocation, the talents. I think that you mentioned earlier about everyone has a talent, and that comes out in the verses here in chapter 12 too. And it's not always easy to find that talent, though, is it? To really know what you're good at. You know. Anybody have any stories they want to share on finding your talents?
Well, they may not even come to their full capability until you, I mean, you find some niche that you think you're going to enjoy, or at least you hope you're going to enjoy. You're going in with the right attitude, and you're not really sure because you're new to the whatever it is that you're getting into. And then as you're in that, I think your talent begins to blossom. And you begin to do more because it becomes more enjoyable. But it's you find that it's a blessing to be in that particular.
Yeah. Ask any college graduate 10 years later if they're still in the field that they originally started in. You know. You know, you kind of start figuring out what you're really good at, not what you think you might be good at, but what you're really good at. You know, so.
This kind of hits me in the context of missions. Served on missions off and on for many years. And I think sometimes it's really daunting because, you know, you have in your heart and your mind some kind of idea that something that we want to do. Is we're a small church, and usually when we've been on missions, we're like 3 people. So you sit there and think, well, what can us little 3 people do to affect the kingdom somehow? What do we do? It's kind of daunting because you have some great ideas, but you feel, I personally at least have felt a little bit, you know, inadequate. Like, well, gee, I can look something up on the computer, or I can find a program or whatever, but how do we make that something meaningful and worthwhile? So I'll tell a story, and I'll tell a story about Jess. She served with Doreen and I. We were on missions together at some point, and there was. Do you remember when we were? She came up with a great idea that her family had done before, where we set up the ladies' tea and sort of had an event here that it was kind of an interconnected event for people in the church. And I remember I have a clear memory of when she started talking about that. It was really great because it really helped me to be able to see an idea and to see that it could come to fruition even with just the few little people that we had. And I have found that on missions and that kind of thing, that it's so helpful. Those times where I feel I'm just, you know, I'm this big, I'm one little small person, right? So it's helpful.
Yeah. And don't be discouraged by if you don't think you've found your talent. You know, the other things in here in chapter 12 in Romans. I mean, Paul is saying, well, pray about it, you know, and be with the believers, help other believers. You'll find it through that whole life stewardship. Then, you know, you may not realize it, but you'll find, you know, how you can serve the church through that process, just through attending and praying, participating, making those conscious efforts throughout the week and throughout the days for, you know, how you want to be involved. So I think it'll really bring out benefits. I think we can all attest to that in our own lives. So,
I didn't want to join Stitch in Time. Everybody said, no, I don't want to join Stitch in Time. And I'm like, I mean, they were making quilts and those kind of things. And I'm like, what am I going to take to work on, blah, blah, blah. I was doing plastic canvas at that point. Anyway, they taught me how to crochet the fleece for the blankets. And
No, you can't stop.
yeah, it's a really big problem. But anyway, they don't necessarily all go to the church locally, but now I do them for the cancer patients at the facility where Bob was going. So, but it's gotten so that, you know, now I have to have so many blankets made by a certain time so I get it, you know. But I was not going to go to Stitch in Time. I just felt it wasn't something that, you know, I didn't have the talent that they had. So I wasn't going to go.
You have so much more.
So.
I like it.
So yeah, the community of believers and coming together can help all of us, you know, and improve on things and learn more, you know, feel more fulfilled also as a result of all that too.
So how many Stitch in Time people have we talked into?
I do not know how to crochet.
Yeah, speaking of crocheting or knitting, do you know the Reba
Yeah.
and
Reba.
Ben?
Yes.
One of their daughters is an artist. Have you ever seen her work?
Oh, it's
I haven't
amazing.
seen it.
She sews paintings, basically, right?
Yeah,
Have you seen that?
it's amazing.
Am I describing that correctly, Sarah? It's basically
I think
she's
that's-
sewing. So if you have a landscape scene,
Yeah.
it's all thread,
Oh
but
my
it
gosh.
looks like a painting.
That is cool.
You know, it's very good.
Wow.
I got the address of the gallery in Dallas where she, you know, you can connect with.
What is her name?
Yeah, something like that.
Rebecca Shoemaker?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
She was
It's amazing.
last summer, I
Wow.
think she was an artist in resident at
Talk about talent.
Petrified Forest National Park. Either last summer or the summer before. Yeah, I've got some really neat pictures I took in the mountains, and I wanted to have one done that way. I'm just afraid it's like $10,000.
Speaking
I'm a little afraid to go in and find
Yeah.
out.
That's resources, yes.
But yeah, there's
Wow.
going to be some really
That's neat.
gorgeous results of your activities.
And you know, there's a talent even in, you know, we have those who handle the financials here and do the offerings every Sunday. Okay, I am not good with money from that.
Just starting to learn about all that,
I
Sarah.
worked in retail. I had a horrible time balancing my drawers. So I know not to get into that. But there are those who are here who do that, and it is a talent.
Well, and one thing I'm learning from that, I'm very new at that, you guys, because I just took over as financial secretary, so poor Doreen's trying to teach me. I'm like, just show me what to do. I'm making notes, you know, she just knows all of it. But that's something I'm starting to learn, is the rhythm of sort of the giving and the weekliness of it, and the abundance, and just it sounds a little weird. There's something spiritual and pretty cool about just going through this little process of keeping up the church. Elliot would know this. You've been involved in this so many times, right? All these other people. You guys have done this. It's an interesting, I'm learning something new through it, what you're talking about here through intentionality and sort of this rhythm of giving and whatnot. I think I'm learning a lot. And it's just sort of visceral, but I'm starting to figure that out. It only took me, being at this church 15 years to figure this part of it out. It's kind of neat to see those other sides, things you take for granted and you just don't. I was talking with Doreen about it yesterday. We were working. It's very interesting. So, yeah, I appreciate that, Sarah, because I'm just starting to learn about that. You know, I like
Yeah, for me,
learning
it's,
about it.
for me, it's
Okay.
numbers.
Yeah,
Just
you're the numbers guy.
something I was always good at, and so
number
I
guy.
just turned it into a career. But it also, every church I've gone to, I just enjoy helping in that area. So it'd be little things or large things, you know.
Yeah, interesting.
Because we have, as it again says in Romans, I think, you know, prophesy as to the proportion you've been given by faith, you know, by the grace of God to prophesy, or, you know, so it's all proportionate too. You don't worry about, you know, whether you're the big toe or the little toe.
I mean,
You know, the
something-
foot can't function without either one. It's a hard time functioning with one of those missing.
Something as simple as taking photos of the
Yeah.
event
Yeah.
so that others could see the fellowship
Yeah,
that went into that.
yeah.
I think there's huge value in just starting to appreciate all the little things that everybody does to keep things up when you're just around and kind of start looking a little bit about just people who put things away or keep the sanctuary in order or handle all the, I'm looking at Elliot again, keeping track of who's here on Sundays, all of those things that go together that just make the church seem to work sort of seamlessly. That's very humbling.
Yeah.
It's hugely humbling, and it's
All the parts of the body.
yeah, it's Ben and I were here the other day, and we sat in the sanctuary in there. We were talking, and yeah, it's just humbling because everything's surrounding you. It's like your little home in there, but you know it only functions and works when everybody's doing all of this stuff that, for the most part, nobody knows anything about, and it's great because God knows what's going on.
Yeah. So, well, let's close with prayer then. So, dear Lord, thank you for bringing us together to study your word, to study about our whole life stewardship. Help us to be intentional about our stewardship with your grace and your word to support us. And help us to pray fervently for your strength and guidance in our lives. We ask this all in your Son's name. Amen.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you.
Good, Randy. All right, so how are you guys?
Get my donut.
Been trying to, because John's been out of town, just have little girls' nights, and we did.
Yeah, Rick's out of town too. When did John leave?
So the memorial was Friday. He left. He flew Thursday.
Okay, okay.
So
When's he coming back?
tonight.
Okay.
He's got work tomorrow.
Okay, okay. So you've been taking these few days and doing some girl stuff.
Yeah, we Kathy gave us a spa pedicure thing.
What you doing?
Would you
like this?
So we did a spa pedicure, and I also had a little thing that we did.
What you're related to,
Yeah.
section,
And we did that yesterday.
kind of summarizes
Rosie
what
Riveter with
Romans
my screwdriver.
12
that's
Hammer,
talks
and it was
about.
so cute.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's good.
You know, and the key
So just write down. Put up on
do it
the
with the strength that God gives to
I appreciate it.
glorify.